We take it for granted. You put the tap on, there it is. Imagine water not coming out. Wells are already running dry in parts of Cochise and Santa Cruz County. There are already water restrictions being put into place. Take a look at California, what's happening there. Take a look at neighboring states, Mexico, and around the world, and start to get a bigger picture. Science, data, reality says that we are using our water at an unsustainable rate.
Three or 4 years ago, there were plans being made for water conservation, and all the citizens and people living in the surrounding area like myself were asked to voluntarily conserve as best we could. All of a sudden it turned out we were drowning in it, and the mining people were hauling it away as fast as they could fill trucks. And it seems to me that one of those things has to be incorrect.
If we knew that the 1 million gallon consumption per day that the mine admits to needing would not leave us all high and dry, then I imagine there are some number of people who would be less worried. But we don't know how it turns out.
I'm sure there's not enough water in Patagonia because we live in the desert.
Everyone knows that, we're in Arizona, and I'm sure there's a limit on the water in this area. I don't think you have to be a hydrologist to assume that. But it is like a tricky thing, and even for hydrologists, it's a really tricky question to know exactly how much water is in our watershed.
These are the conditions that might be found down here in Patagonia along Sonoyta Creek. So typical aquifer that is mostly sand, clay, silt, gravel. The word aquifer more to mean sediments from which you can extract water fairly easily. Like you can put a well in, and you'll get some water that you can use. So unconfined aquifer here. Confined aquifer is one that is under pressure. You might think of it as artesian. And typically what'll keep it under pressure is a clay body, because the water just can't move very easily through that. So you might have a mountain over here, water's moving underground towards the valley, and that creates a pressure under here. So when you put a well in, the water level in that well will be higher than the actual level of it in the aquifer. So in this one, we've got a flow field and an unconfined aquifer flowing to a stream. Everything's nice and homogeneous. And then we put in a well, and suddenly it starts drawing water to the area here. So you can see it's going to alter the flow field. And you can actually start to get a cone of depression if it's pulling in more water than can be replaced by the flow. And that can increase to the point where you're actually taking water from your stream into the well. So you can reverse directions. Isotopes can actually tell you in your area whether a well is getting stream water or groundwater. This is a picture of a fairly uniform fractured rock aquifer. What we've got in the Patagonia is super complicated geology. This one actually has a water table drawn. To try and draw a continuous water table in fractured rock is an illusion. If you have a well that is in bedrock and you get water from it, you're getting it from fractures. When I'm trying to figure out what's going on with geology and the flow of water, and you suddenly add a spaghetti diagram to it, it becomes virtually impossible for me to say water is flowing from point A to point B. And part of our problem with trying to verify that, to go into these places can be super dangerous. And when you get limestone or any of the limestone-related minerals, you can get caves forming in there, and all bets are off about how water's going to flow. It's more unknowable than mining tunnels.
I'm standing in front of our main water tank near our well right now. It's going to be very hard to know how much water is up there. It's not a huge mountain system, and once the water gets underground, it's really difficult to find it. We have a well right here. It's pretty obvious that it's being so close to this creek. We tried to drill another well right over there. Nothing. During periods of prolonged drought, the water goes down. And it's been down to 65 feet. Approximately 5 years ago, we had to purchase water from the town of Patagonia. Unfortunately, that didn't last long. And so when the monsoon came, the water was restored in the well within a matter of days. And we were back up to our normal levels. So it's directly under the influence of rain, fall, and the monsoon season is critical.
In arid lands where the precipitation might not equal the amount of drawdown. So in other parts of the country and other parts of the world, you might have more of that water budget being expressed over time in different precipitation patterns versus in southern Arizona. We don't see that much rainfall coming down, and so the balance of that water budget is especially sensitive. My studies looking at acid mine drainage have been using sediment dispersion models to track the fate and transport of acid mine drainage from abandoned mines in Patagonia. Typically in hydrology, the solution to pollution is dilution. And when you don't have a lot of water to dilute the polluted water, then the polluted water is more polluted. More condensed acid mine drainage phenomenon.
My name is Pete Dronkers. I'm the Southwest Circuit Rider for Earthworks. We're a national nonprofit organization focused on environmental and social impacts of extractive industry. If you have a consumptive water use up there at the mine site in that general area, what that does is it takes away from water that would be recharged into the ground, and that would ultimately recharge the Sonoyta Creek groundwater system. So it's really just simple math. You take massive amounts of water out of the system and it has impacts elsewhere. Combined with drought and climate change, it's kind of a double whammy of negative impacts. And it's also not just limited to that, because there's people that live up there and ranches that supply on water wells. If you're living anywhere around that mine site, Upper Harshaw Creek, even above the mine, and the mine is dewatering down there, there's almost certainly a link in the hydrologic system between your water well and the mine below it. And as they pump that water out, the water that you're reliant on is then going down into that system, and so very likely to have impacts there. Anyone who's relying on a water well, which is most people, including the actual town of Patagonia itself, because they have municipal supply wells that are relatively shallow, all of these wells are very sensitive to the levels of the groundwater.
These are 50-pounders. I'm Kristen Peterson. I'm a rancher in Patagonia, Arizona. The water for the cattle ranching is so important. Without it, we'd be obviously out of business. Cattle drink a lot of water every day. A lactating cow, she's going to drink maybe 30 gallons a day, so average probably 20 gallons a day per animal. We'll check water daily. And I also manage for a neighbor on his ranch, and so between the two of us we have almost 20,000 acres and many wells and many pipelines and troughs, and there's been many times the water level was so low we couldn't pump enough. I have hauled water. I've hired the local people in town to fill up 3,000 gallons and take some pretty rough country to get up there. Many of our pastures are pretty much only accessible by horseback, and so if there was ever an issue where I had to haul water to always to all my cattle where they were, it wouldn't be possible. In fact, right now I'm in one pasture, should be moving to the next, but I can't go because we haven't had the winter rains. I know that there's the local mine that's now in Patagonia, AMI, is planning on using a lot of water per day, more than I can even envision. I don't know exactly how all the water aquifers and how everything works, but it does concern me that it could draw down our water supply. If we run out of water here in the Patagonia area and on my ranch, I'll be out of business. It would be nice if I could say there'd be a provision in the law that I could have this much water. I don't know how realistic that is to ask that. Obviously, as a rancher and the need for water, I would love to know that I'm going to have water. But I don't know how you would write a law to do that, but it'd be great.
One asks, how important is water? Water is fundamental. Water is life. All my clients All the folks that I deal with know that, because in some ways they're being challenged by the loss of it, the contamination of it. Arizona has a bifurcated system of water law, watching rain come down and where it goes and how it works. Water is all connected. But Arizona has made a decision in its legal framework to treat surface water, they call it appropriable water, one way under a system of entitlement and vested property rights, and groundwater a totally different way. And of course, having laws that treat things very differently, when we know in fact that they're very much connected, is part of where the challenges come from in all aspects of doing water law, and in Patagonia's case, when you're dealing with mining. So surface water, that is water you see in rivers and streams and things like this, and water that is directly underneath or adjacent to rivers and springs. In other words, you may not see it, but it's called subflow. So under Arizona's doctrine, it's a Western water law concept of first in time, first in right. And what that means is, for folks that have rights, appropriable rights, to a river, let's just take River X. The person who used that river, diverted from that river, and applied that water to a beneficial use at a certain rate, a certain amount, has priority, complete priority, over a person that came later. Groundwater in Arizona is treated differently. So groundwater means that essentially you're sinking groundwater wells. They can be groundwater dewatering from a mine, or they can just be a mom and pop well, right? But if you're outside an active management area like Patagonia, there is really no protections or restrictions on your groundwater pumping, so long as that whatever you're pumping, you're pulling out of that water, out of the ground, you're not wasting it. So it's kind of just a doctrine of reasonable use. And so what's important to understand there is, you're thinking of this timing element under prior appropriation, under groundwater pumping. If you have a well, and you've had that well, it's a 500-foot well, it's a nice well, it's been producing for years and years and years. You've had that well for 25 years. I move in next door to you, sink a more powerful well, just say I just do that, and I dry your well up, there's nothing you can do about it under Arizona law.
My name is Diana Nash, and my family owns the Circle Z Ranch. The ranch first started operating in 1926. Sonoyta Creek was important to them when they were first looking at purchasing properties. I think they looked all around Arizona, and when they found this property along Sonoyta Creek, they realized all the benefits because of all the wildlife that is supported by the stream, as well as just the beauty. They realized how important that was as a draw for guests coming to an oasis in the middle of the desert because of Sonoyta Creek. We have 100 head of horses, and they don't directly drink out of the stream, but the wells that come from the groundwater, which are fed by this stream, that's what keeps our horses watered. During the 6-month on season, we have about 20 staff. We bring up to 30 guests here on a weekly basis, and they shop in the community. We also support a lot of the local contractors with building projects. I'm proud that we've been able to stay focused on the traditional guest ranch experience and keep it a vital business without having to change. And we've basically been the same for 90 plus years. Our guests come from really all over the world. We get guests from Germany, Switzerland. Many of our guests come from England, Finland. I've spoken with representatives of the mines about the water use, and they say to me that, oh, people misunderstand because we're going to be putting all that water back into the aquifer. We're not actually taking it. We're using it, whatever, and putting it back in. I mean, I hear what they're saying, but I can't imagine how that is not going to affect our stream flows and our water. If we get to if it indeed affects the stream and it affects our groundwater. I mean, we've had these wells and the usage of this area for 90 years. If they come in and start affecting what keeps us as a vital business, that's a huge concern. I mean, if we don't have water, we can't have horses. We can't have a business. I mean, that would be the end of us.
I'm Vincent Pinto, and you're at Raven's Nest Nature Sanctuary, part of Ravensway Wild Journeys, our nature, adventure, and conservation organization. We offer a wide variety of educational opportunities, including bird watching, of which we have over 500 species. We take people out on general nature tours and wildlife safaris. We also do wildlife tracking. We've had the privilege of hosting thousands of people over the years. My wife Claudia and I chose this area because it's a very special area for wildlife, for plants, for geology. Deserts and grasslands and mountains and forests all kind of meld together in one coherent network of habitat that allows wildlife to move around and not get isolated and get endangered. This area of the United States has more mammal species than any comparable area, about 30 more species than Yellowstone National Park, which is famous for mammals. All this beautiful biodiversity. How could you ever possibly feel lonely out here? It's just populated with so many different species.
When you're looking at a landscape like these Sky Islands of the Southwest, and you read Edward O. Wilson, the premier ethnobotanist on the planet, when he speaks of biodiversity and the necessity for biodiversity, this is one of the 3 most important regions in the entire country, the Sky Islands, because of that biodiversity. And water, available water, is essential for that. Given the shifts in weather patterns I've seen since 1998 and the considerable loss of water in this landscape and the predictions through the climate institutes for the future for here, I'd say protecting our resource and really enhancing it through enhancing the watershed by doing similar things to what we're doing here at Deep Dirt, I think would be a way not only to increase an economic base in the community, but to do it through building up our watershed. AMI demand for water for doing a big industrial project like that doesn't make sense. I know that they're planning to clean the water and put some of it back in, but what you're putting back in after those very heavy industrial processes very not what was taken out. If you understand what it takes to clean up mine wastewater, it's a phenomenal thing to really clean that water. That would leave me very concerned about the future of water to support a community like this and a landscape that is as valuable as this.
The mine will be using just a little bit less than 1 million gallons of water each day. That's stated in multiple documents that AMI has prepared, such as their preliminary economic report. There are a large number of old abandoned mines in the Patagonia Mountains. Trench Mine was one of the larger ones, but these mines are typically abandoned by the mining company when they're done with them. AMI was granted title to the Trench Mine by a DEQ in exchange for a promise to clean up the old trench mine, which continues to discharge acid mine drainage. The water that they've used in their mining processes or drainage from the mountain will be collected and be piped to the water treatment plant. It will be treated there, and most of it will be piped back up the mountain and reused by the mine. However, they do have a permit from the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality to discharge water as necessary, meaning when there's heavy precipitation that overwhelms the capacity of the system, or if there's a system malfunction and things aren't working right. So it will be discharged, but not in any orderly kind of way. Now they're spending well in excess of $3 million for this water treatment plant. But it's really a small price to pay because it then gives them the opportunity to mine on their private land, which is very important.
Patagonia is in the Sonoyta Creek watershed, which is a tributary of the Santa Cruz Basin. The water runs into the Santa Cruz River and up to Tucson, and there is a regular flow. The USGS has a study going on looking at the hydrogeochemistry of the mountains. And really, it's a very complex system underneath the mountains of Patagonia. And we don't really have a very good understanding of what the impacts of historical mines and shafts have been, never mind what would be future explorations. And so given all of the different faults and fractures and aquifers that we still don't completely understand the connectivity.
A mine being conducted on Forest Service lands, fully on Forest Service lands. There would be a National Environmental Policy Act a NEPA process where the Forest Service would look at the mining plan of operations. Oh, what's the mine going to look like? How's it going to be built out? How much are they going to be pumping? Where are the wells going to be? What's going to be the mine dewatering process? When you're on private property, that's a different matter. None of those sort of holistic examinations happen. You know, unless you have the funds to do comprehensive groundwater modeling, how do you even know what they're saying is accurate or not? That's very, very difficult, layered on top of all the scientific challenges.
I think the unregulated use of water that the mine is proposing will affect our area tremendously, putting heavy metals into it and other suspect chemicals. And who's going to monitor that? Apparently, as it stands now, the mine itself will monitor that, which is like the fox monitoring the hen house. You put a mine in the middle of one of the most beautiful of the Sky Islands, the Patagonia Mountains, who's going to want to go there? No one, for instance, as far as I know, goes to Clifton and Morenci in east central Arizona for the beauty of it.
Plants are the foundation for everything that happens ecologically. So for any system to work, even for the earth and the ground to actually stay intact, you need grasses so that the water doesn't just wash everything away. We work with homeowners, and we work with ranchers, and we work with public land managers to enhance biodiversity and bring out all the cool species of plants that make out the foundation for the habitat. And I think everyone wishes, even the people that are really excited about the mine, even they do wish that we could know what the water situation was like. And so that's very stressful because, you know, we don't really know how deep people can afford to drill down to get more water. And beyond that, looking at it from an ecosystem perspective, we have things like oak trees that depend on groundwater that right now, there are plenty of plants that don't just tap into aquifers, but then there are larger trees and different plants that do, that if the water table sinks to a certain point, they are all just going to die. And if that's not being recharged quickly enough. So that puts a huge stress for me on thinking about, we want to keep having quail here, we want to keep having all these birds here. People come from all over the world to see this biodiversity. So if a lot of those larger trees die off, that'd be awful. And it'd be really hard to get that back to the area. As someone that really plans on being here for the rest of my life, that really, really values everyone that lives here, it still really stresses me out that, yeah, a mine can come in and get approval to potentially give jobs for a certain amount of time, but also at the great expense of everyone, like the entire community living here.
I was at the Arizona Mining presentation of their PEA, or Preliminary Economic Analysis, and a lot of town was there. It was a pretty intense dynamic. As someone that's lived here several years and invested a lot of time and energy into this place and cares for it a lot, I just felt extremely disrespected by the way that not just Don Taylor, but the whole movement of people behind Arizona Mining spoke to the audience. I felt there were a lot of manipulation and arrogance in their presentation that wanted the town people to look past things, not investigate the truth of what could happen.
The central piece of your argument, or your case of why we should allow this to happen here as a community, is it's economical. It brings business and lots of money here. But that statement seems very misleading to me, because it's really hard to see that pie chart, but could you actually tell me what % is Santa Cruz County?
Big piece of the pie?
Yeah.
Is 42.2 million is the vendors in southern Arizona. Most of our drillers, there's no drillers in Patagonia, so most of our drillers come from Chandler, Arizona.
So similar to the last question, it said 92% was the Patagonia area. How much of that $1 billion actually goes to the Patagonia area and not the state of Arizona?
You don't want me to drive through the town. You don't want me to put any of my business here, and you wonder how much money I'm going to spend here. That's a tough question. That number right there has nothing to do, really, with the money that's going to be spent in Patagonia.
So all your statistics say in Patagonia.
And surrounding areas?
So it should probably say in surrounding areas and potentially Patagonia.
I'll change the slide and placate you.
I think anytime someone asks a revealing question, they get brushed aside. It seems like money is what's expected to speak for everyone. But I think that people of this town are starting to see more how we're being treated through all these interactions with the company and with the executives of the company.
Typically what I've seen is that Companies will come in and they'll basically showcase their wealth around all the important decision makers, giving people this sense that their lives are going to be so much better. And people say, oh, these people are really nice and they're all about, you know, wealth and having jobs, but you really have to weigh the long-term impacts and what you're willing to sacrifice to have a relatively short financial shot in the arm, and then a community left dealing with these enormous impacts. I mean, projects like this divide communities, and that's really kind of always been the case with these big projects. People who used to be on really good terms as neighbors will start fundamentally disagreeing with each other over a proposed project, and it'll become very, very personal.
Smaller communities, your well runs dry, it gets real serious real quick. Up in Mojave County, they're facing challenges from large ag that's coming in and other interests that are pumping some of their historical wells dry. They're worried down in Cochise County similarly.
It is legal to actually create a mine that will have toxic drainage for thousands of years, because that's how long it takes for an ore body to actually exhaust its acid generating capacity. Very, very small scale mines that were built during the Roman Empire are still generating heavy metals and acid today. The way you avoid that is the community tells the mining company, we will fight you every way we can until you can prove that you can build this without generating acid for all of time. And their answer will be, well, we have a plan for that. We'll treat it, and then we'll discharge it. It'll be clean water. Okay, well, how do you do that over the thousands of years when it costs millions of dollars a year to run a treatment plant like that? When the company's no longer making money, those companies will no longer exist. They'll be 500 years in the past, hundreds of years, thousands of years in the past. Nobody will even be able to recognize what that financial entity was that long ago, and yet the mine will still be generating acid and heavy metals into the environment.
Clean air, clean water, you know, as two big ones that should be everyone's right, regardless of socioeconomic status or anything else.
That should be the right of everyone. That's why we all have to be careful and make sure we don't waste water so that there is enough for everyone.
I think clean water is more than a right. It should be the foundation of our society.
Because it's one of those building blocks, like elemental building blocks of life.
It's the basic necessity of life is clean water, and I think we've seen with, you know, industries polluting the water and how that affects whole communities with lead and arsenic, and I mean it affects children and it affects the critters in our environment.